Hello, welcome again to another discussion on Talk Architecture Podcast by your host Naziaty Yaacob. This is part 2 on the topic that museum is not recommended to be a design thesis topic. In part 1, I gave the opinion that the site context will be disregarded if you, as a student of architecture, decides to use the museum design as your topic for design thesis. And I've explained more or less to justify my argument. In this part 2 discussion, I would like to hypothetically put two design thesis topics together. One is a museum and another is, let's say, library. Okay. Often a museum project, the student of architecture will be interested to do like a Chinese cultural museum in Petaling Street. For example, in Malaysia, I'm just quoting projects that have happened before by students of architecture. And what I'm trying to say is from the beginning of this conversation with myself, hoping that this conversation can be also be addressed out there, is that the learning that the student will have is too specialized. It has to be specialized if it's a museum type of project. And it is something that it's not the right time. Although people will say, hey, you can do anything in your design thesis, what you like, because that's the most important project and it will help to serve you what you're going through, what you're going to go through in that particular year. In the 5th year is going to be this transition to graduating and entering employment. So when you're in you're practicing, you won't be able to do this project again. Well, that was a sentiment. I've heard of this sentiment a number of times. And then I realized there's a lot of wrong in this sentiment. I'm talking about purely from an educationist, that at a certain level, there should be some certain exploration for you to sort of cap the 5 years and then transition, because that cap, excuse me, at the 5th year level is like challenging yourself in the highest order and challenging yourself to designing something in context rather than not having to do the context, having to be so specialized. I didn't mention about hospital, but the approach to designing a hospital would be that yours would be an alternative type of design to the existing hospital. But there's a lot of people and relationship in the hospital design, so it is challenging a lot there. Yeah, a museum or a project that may not deal with human being as the main thing. Because a museum, you have artifacts, you have evidence from the past, art or diorama or some sort of display, and the way how the architecture is designed to evoke some experience that is like a fantasy or like a recreation, reconstructed, preserved. So it is about the artifact or the display more than the people. The people just view it or experience the space. So the affordability of getting students of architecture to do something that provide the best transition before going into practice is not there. Just because that the possibility of not ever designing a museum is the sentiment that you design a museum in the 5th year is something that should not be it's not important. It's irrelevant, really. What is relevant is to be ready for practice. One needs to be really sharp and be challenged a lot and dealing with context. Now, in architecture practice, you cannot assume things. I mean, people would say or assume that, oh, you don't really design context anyway because you're doing all this you have to follow the guidelines or the legal requirements that local authorities have, and your client wouldn't really want to think about people anyway. It's different. Practice is different in a sense that if you're working in a commercial practice, you'll be learning how to be a business person. You will be the architect that says that architecture is a vehicle for your business. And you're being truthful because out there, that's the way it is, right? But you don't lie, you don't be dishonest about it. In practice, that you are helping people, but you're not. You're actually being a commercial architect. There is a facade of, you're actually a commercial architect, but you say you're going to help people. So, going back to museum design, if one is lucky enough to be able to design a museum in one's lifetime as an architect in practice, then that's really interesting. We have known of masters in architecture or star architects that managed to get that project, and yes, congratulations, and we marvel at it and we experience it. But the rest of the 99% of those graduating will not have a chance, or maybe 90%, they will not have a chance of designing a museum. So, in the 5th year, going back into that parallel design development or design process of 2 hypothetical project and its designer in the 5th year. So one is doing a museum, one is doing a library. So site visit, okay, identify the site, and then do the site analysis, and then client's brief. So the museum probably have a department or a rich person or some sort of funding for the museum. So, and then have a collection of artifacts or items for display, and the ideas of how to get people around in that museum design. So the library project will determine about the neighborhood, about the people around it, whether there are facilities in the library that you want to get people to come to the space because you want people to learn or use the library. Maybe children or school children coming in to do their homework there, or borrow books, and nowadays library is more of an interactive space, as I noticed. And sometimes the library is located next to a sports center or a community facility, so that it's convenient, and that they're all located at the same sort of area. Whereas a museum is like an iconic sort of, you'd want to see the museum as a form. It's like selfish like that, it's like you go around and look at a museum from outside, and then you enter and you have a certain feeling or experience, and then the first is the introduction and take you to one space to another. So in the beginning, the museum doesn't, the museum designer could disregard people's needs or the neighborhood need, because people visit from afar, or people come, it's located in an area where it's far from where the city center is anyway, or it's located on a hill, or it's depending on the site. If the museum is associated with the site, then it's a historical site, and there's some conservation guidelines. So it's quite often that schools of architecture would have a conservation sort of group, but the student, can they take it to another level where it's really specialized design? Often it's all about the theatrical or the stage-like sequences of the spaces, like a show gallery, or the best that they could create is people looking at people walking around, but that's not the point. The point is looking at the artifact and how the space was created for that artifact, and how people view the space or view to be. So this is like a highly specialized space, as opposed to library or community center or markets, or they're doing an activity of buying or selling or reading a book and so on. So as we go to the schematic design phase, where you crit for the first time with the visiting critics. So the visiting critics hear out the presentation of the student on the museum, and the visiting critic will say, okay, so we're talking about form a lot, and by the time it finishes in the first semester, after 8 weeks, after the proposal is 8 weeks, and then 14 weeks of first semester, it's either the critique is very subjective, right? It's right, and the design problem is the same, right? For a museum, it's about the visitor's experience and stuff, and a bit of detail here and there. It's either they don't like it or they like it. So that the debate is about the visiting critic's preference. It's not referred to the students' design problem. It's not, because they have been coming for crits, like for 14 weeks, maybe you have 6 times there are crits. And it's the same thing over and over again about the museum. And it's not really, there's not much learning happen. It's either they like it or they don't like it. And it's about them. It's about those critics, whether they like it or not. Have you heard a crits where there's a museum project? The debate is there. That's why I'm saying that the student won't learn much compared to those who are doing the other project. So compare that to at the end of first semester, where the person doing the library get crits by the critics, and it's about circulation, it's about the how people enjoy the space, the reading space, about the carol, how you do your study there, is about how people come in, what the important space is even more interesting if you place it in an area where there is a bus terminal. There was one student who did a library and a bus terminal together. And there's enough complexity for the student to actually think about people. You know, when they start designing, they think about people. They think about the the elderly lady. They're thinking of with a shopping basket, or coming at about 10, finishing everything, the market, and having a break at the library, reading up the news and talking to another friend, or is about the students coming in to study and groups of them and how they use the library. Is about disabled persons coming in, or elderly people in wheelchairs, or is about how people drop by the library and drop books and stuff like that. It's about the people. It's not about the critics' feelings about or what they like. It's about what people like. It's about empathizing more than the museum. The museum is not about empathizing. So then you go to the second semester and you go to specialization. So the second part, or the second semester, how much of specialization will this museum design go to? Because when at the end of first semester people are debating, oh, I don't really like, I like. So the student end up still designing the form. Still trying to make the building more exciting, the museum building more exciting than before. You know? So stuck in that mode where they're not really learning much. What in real life, in architecture practice, if you are doing a museum design, you're doing the display design, you're doing everything to do with the artifact. Okay, there's a huge, this is a museum of the war, and there's a huge tank in the middle, and then you're designing the space around appreciating the tank or the jet, you know, and then you have to do like a medium span or a long span structure. Then you're going into structure design, obviously. Fine. And then, if you get to that point, if the first stage is all right already with the visiting critics, then you get to the point where you could design the space, the display space, or make that huge model or something. But you're learning. What about your learning? So the second one, which is the library, in the second semester, there's a lot of details that you need to do. Because it's to do with environmental science, cross-ventilation, or sustainable design. It has to do with user-friendly design. It has to do with a lot of things to do with the reading and going around the circulation, and maybe in the public area, in the ground level. So there's a lot of design problems in the library project that are to do with a lot of different areas of specialization, and which at your level, at that level, the student's level, is pertinent to their development. Okay, I've explained as much as I could about the design process and development. Another thing that I like to explain is form making, and the problem of being too much into form making. The student of architecture that does a museum in design thesis, I'm putting out on a limb this statement. If you have friends, if you know of people who did museum as their design thesis or final year project, you will notice that they are fixated with form making. And if possible, in their designs, as a practicing architect or designer, they would fuss over the form making aspect of the architecture design, because they had a year of that doing the museum, and then they fall back to that way. They won't be a total architect in a way that they have a design methodology that incorporate empathizing with people, designing for people. They don't. So when you look at the way they design, it's a handicap in a way that they find themselves always starting with form making in the beginning of the design. So it's limiting their capabilities. Whereas somebody who's doing a project like a library or similar community projects, which has a lot of complexities and design problems relating to people, the issues of people, they tend to think about more functional, more to do with the usability and accessibility and safety and the design for, how people will interact with the building more, and how people spaces, or they're more into volume spaces and less and some detailed design, but they're good enough in the sense that when they set out to do a project, they would think about those terms, spaces and volumes, or more spaces and functionality and detailed design. So at the beginning, they've already got in their repertoire a lot more sensibilities to design. Because what projects are there out there that they could design, right? Housing, mostly residential designs. There's a lot of more of those projects out there for a percentage of the architects that's practicing, right? There are some with institutional buildings or schools, maybe, yeah, and commercial buildings like supermarket or malls or eateries. So those are to do with the people and detailed design, spaces and volumes. So that's my debate on this topic, and this concluding episode of Museum is not recommended to be the design thesis topic for students of architecture in the 5th year. So I hope that this finally to put to bed my argument, and I do look forward to debate more on design topics. Take care.